This is Algebra 1, Lesson 17b. We're going to be talking about terms. A term is an algebraic expression, but specifically it's going to consist of a single variable. We've talked about that. A letter that stands in place of a value and or a constant. Okay, so you're going to have just a variable or a constant. And we'll look at an example of these in just a second. Number 2, it also could be the indicated. Now, what do we usually use after that? You hear me say a lot, that indicates a multiplication. Well, the answer to a multiplication is a product. So a term could be an indicated product or quotient. You know, the quotient is the answer to a division problem. So it could be the indicated product or quotient of variables and or constants. We'll look at an example in just a little bit. It also could be the indicated product or quotient of expressions. So maybe not just one variable or constant that contain variables and or constants. Okay, so let's look at some examples of these here. The example, the first one here is 4. Okay, so if you look at the number 4, that's an example of number 1 here. Okay, it is a single variable or constant. In this case, 4 is a constant. Its value stays the same. Okay, just a number would be a constant. So that is an example of number 1. All right, let's look at x. X is a single variable. So you could have 4 or you could have x. Both of these are examples of number 1. They consist of a single variable or a single constant. But 4x is not a single variable or a single constant. It is the indicated product. Okay, it's not a quotient, but an indicated product or quotient of variables and or constants. This is an indicated product of a variable, which is x, and a constant, which is 4. Okay, so that's an example of the second situation. So we'll put 4x right next to number 2. Now you get into the bigger ones. Look at number 3, an indicated product or quotient of expressions that are going to contain variables and or constants. So I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. Do you see how we have this entire expression up here? And then it's indicating that we are dividing it by a variable, right? That's what this definition is talking about. It is an indicated product or quotient. So in this case, it's an indicated quotient. They're showing us with this bar that we're going to be dividing. And what are we dividing? We're dividing expressions. This is the expression that we're dividing by this other variable. Okay, so this is an example of 3. Okay, that's kind of long, so I'll just say that's number 3 there. Okay, and if you look at the last one, we have an indicated quotient again. And what are we dividing? We are dividing this expression by this variable. So it is also an example of number 3. Let's look at this expression. Okay, this is one big long expression. Okay, and what we just went through was what terms are. Okay, so now in this expression, let's see how many terms does this have? Well, notice that we said just a minute ago that this is a term. You recognize it there. Okay, and then we have a plus sign. Okay, and then this looks similar to what we said here is a term. And then we have a minus sign. And then this here is very similar to the way these were listed, right? You've got an expression in the numerator and in the denominator, and there's an indicated division. And then there's a minus sign. And then we have a constant here. And that constant is like this. So we actually have 4 terms in this expression. And I'll tell you a way that you can see the difference between those terms is you start reading, okay, I've got x, stop, when you see a plus or a minus. Start highlighting again, stop, I see a minus. Okay, now notice there's a plus in here, but I'm not talking about inside of the indicated multiplication or division. I'm talking about this whole thing is set off by a subtraction here and a subtraction here. So that whole thing is a term, and then this is a term. So there are 4 terms there, and they're going to be separated by an addition or a subtraction. Okay? All right, what are the 4 terms? Well, we just listed them. Here we've got the first term, the second term, the third term, and the fourth term. And this is really helpful for us when we're looking at expressions. I could give you this expression and say, hey, what's the numerical coefficient of the second term? And you would look down at that expression and you'd say, well, she's talking about this one because that's the second term, and the numerical coefficient is 4. Okay, so it just helps us to be able to label things and be able to speak about expressions. All right, and then the last thing I noted was notice the signs. Okay, so we said that each term is going to be separated by an addition or subtraction. And again, I'm not talking about this addition because it's part of that indicated division or quotient. So when you look at these symbols, I'm taking it with what's right after it. Okay, so if it had me list the terms, I would list the terms as x, 4x, y, m, and then I would put a negative in front of this next one. Negative 6p over y plus 2. There's your third term, and the fourth term would be negative 8. So the important thing there is to notice that the sign of the term is what's in front of it, not what's behind it. I see sometimes students will say that this is negative because of this. No, it's the sign that's in front of it. That's an easy mistake to make. So look at the sign that's in front of it. And if you want more discussion on that, you can look in the book. And at the end of this 17b section, it talks more about the signs, a little more in depth than what I'm going to cover in the videos.